I'm running for the better trees. No, you need to be better in finding cool way to tweet about our event, because actually it's a bit biased, but the coolest tweet is from me. So that cannot happen, okay? So now I would like to call on stage Eleanor Perfetto from the National Health Council, Tjerkjan Scheutmaker, no, Paul Robinson, really? Or both? No? And Ingrid Klingmann, she's here. Great. So then we can have a takeaway message. Please, come on what happened this morning during the interactive sessions. So who wants to go first? We have about 10 minutes.
Okay.
Paul,
shall I start?
As you wish.
Okay. The workshop that I'm reporting back on was the work package 3, which is the metrics workshop. We had, I think, about 100 people in the room, which was really well attended, and we talked about the work that we've achieved so far in terms of literature review and developing a framework for how to monitor and evaluate patient engagement activities, and how we've refined that and how we've now rolled that out to a number of pharmaceutical companies and patient organizations to let them play with it, let them experiment with it and see if it actually works in practice. So we've done a lot of the creative work, but it now needs to be refined. We had 3 presentations, one from Lucas from Novo Nordisk to talk about how the pharma company has implemented this and how they found it. One from Natalie Beer from EMA to talk about her experience in patient engagement in the EMA and how they've evaluated the response. And the third one was from, somebody help me, Rob, who talked about the community advisory board that Euraudius are setting up in different diseases, and again how they've evaluated whether this is useful or not. In fact, Rob said that he felt like he was in a petri dish sometimes, with lots of people looking at him and trying to decide whether he'd done a good job or not. We also use a software called Mentimeter, so everybody had their mobile phone and could vote. I actually was very impressed with that software. I think it was a really nice way of getting feedback from the audience, and it will give us some useful data because we can tell whether you were industry or patient or regulator, etc. I think that what came out of it was possibly we're making this too complicated. We had extremes of views from Loda, who was just saying you just need a smiley face or a sad face, akin to what you get when you walk out of security at the airport. And only if you're getting lots of sad faces do you need to go deeper into finding out why people are unhappy with the quality. If everyone's happy with what's coming out of it, actually you don't need to go any deeper. That was one extreme. The other extreme, not surprisingly, was that we need deep and meaningful surveys at regular and frequent intervals. I don't know about you, but when I checked in here, by the time I got to my room, I had my first survey question on my phone saying, were you happy with the check-in experience? Now, I think there's survey fatigue, and I think we will rapidly turn people off. But somewhere in between those two, we need to find something that is useful and valuable. The other thing I learned, I think, was that whilst industry tends to focus on numerical operational metrics, patient recruitment, dropout rates, all of which are very easy to measure, the measurements around trust, reputation, education, motivation were probably features higher than I expected. Now, they're not quite so easy to measure trust or motivation or education, but I did pick up a message that people feel that those are extremely valuable outputs of patient engagement, and we should try and find a simple way of assessing those. So it was a really helpful session from the Work Package 3 point of view, and we then had one final question, which was, did you enjoy the session, and did you find it useful? And again, we have a metric, and I think we got 4 out of 5 or 4.5 out of 5, so that wasn't bad either.
Great, and we also plan to send a satisfaction survey.
And we'll be doing T-tests on those, because we like T-tests.
Cool, thank you very much. Can we take questions from people attending the sessions? Did Paul miss anything? Well, that's a weird way to put it, but does anyone want to know more about the session that Paul just described? Oh, there is one question. Yeah, there's a gentleman on the back. The microphone is coming to you.
Okay, mine is not a question, just a comment on one of the outputs of the session, the plenary session. I think Lourdes' point, if I understood correctly, was that even when you have many people taking the smiley faces, you could still go deep and find out what is it that you're doing very well that you want to continue. So I just wanted to add that point.
Yeah, continuous.
If I'm correct, of course.
Continuous improvement. I misquoted Loda deliberately.
Fair enough. Do we have other questions? No? Good. Eleanor,
Okay.
could you take the lead now?
Great. So our session was on fair market value. And so I reported on a National Health Council project in fair market value for compensation for patients and patient groups, and also want to recognize our partners in this with PFMD and We Can. So I gave an overview of what we're doing. The process is not yet complete, so there are still some things that are in review that we're not able to fully release yet, but very soon, once the review process is completed. But what really it comes down to is that FMV is being calculated through a process, and that process includes what is the activity that someone is being asked to perform, either an individual patient or a caregiver or a patient organization. What is the skill or expertise needed to perform that activity, and what is the time needed to perform that activity? And so the process so far has been to develop compensation and reimbursement principles, and those are in review right now. But an example of one of the basic principles is that compensation for expertise and time is and should be considered separate and distinct from reimbursement for things like travel expenses or other things like that. These are two separate things. So our principles include very logical statements like that. The next thing that is almost complete and that we got some feedback on today, some excellent feedback on today, is our activity list. What are the activities that someone might be asked to do? So keeping in mind that we are taking the content, the subject matter, and considering that separate from the actual activity itself, we started today with a list of 11 activities that our group has come up with, and it's a consolidation of the 150 plus activities that the PFMD survey came up with, where we lumped them into buckets. And they include interview, focus group, consultancy, co-development together, presentation/speaker, survey responder, reviewer of some type of material, advisory/governance board or committee member, mock trial participant, recruitment support, being shadowed in daily life, and then in a communication or awareness campaign. So we asked in our interactive session, are there any activities that we missed or that should be elaborated upon? And the group came up with some very good ones, which we'll incorporate in. One that was not clearly distinct from the 11 that we had identified is research leader or research investigator that is a leadership role as opposed to being brought on in a consultancy role. And that would be really having some ownership of the project. And so we have to figure out a way to describe that and incorporate that into the list. Another suggestion was to add refinement to what a reviewer is, because there are so many different ways that someone might be a reviewer. On the patient advocacy group side, providing training, because many groups might provide training aspects to the work, and then they may also be involved in providing for us to add more detail in a patient group's activity of providing data generation or data-related activities. We asked a second question, and that was, what are the things that we should be thinking about right now in terms of barriers to implementation of something like this? And there were numerous barriers, and in the short time between the sessions, I was able to consolidate them into about 6 or 7 buckets here, so they may not all be here yet. But number one was, a barrier could be the rules that are already in place. And those include things like organizations' internal rules, the established norms and rates that exist already, or national legal regulations and restrictions. A second barrier are ethical issues. So that would include how do we deal with children and adolescents when they are the targets for patient engagement activities, and what are the ethical issues with paying the child or legal issues with paying the child, along with those with cognitive impairment or mental illnesses or illnesses that have stigma. And then another ethical issue is, does this roll up and become something where payment would be expected for clinical trial participation, even though we consider that separate from patient engagement activities? What might be the overflow? The third is a definition of how we define experience with the disease. And we all agreed that it is not number of years since diagnosis, but what do we do to come up with a clearer definition? Fourth was transparency of the process is needed, and we accept that, but transparency of the process is different than everyone understanding the process, and that we need to make sure that everyone understands what is the process and structure of FMV and why might the numbers be what they are. Another is complexity, and it's best to keep it simple because complexity can be a barrier. A recommendation that there be education of the compliance officers, the financial accounting office, and those who are responsible for reporting within companies so that they really understand what this is all about and what it entails. And I think lastly, I would sum it up as one of the conclusions that we came to is that doing a good job of FMV and using the FMV information is going to be hand in glove with the contracting issues that we discussed yesterday, very much so. Also, kind of thinking about the human factors and just being patient-centered in general. And then lastly, common sense.
Great, thank you very much. Do we have any question for Eleanor? Are you getting tired?
Hungry.
Is it boring?
Hungry.
I rarely hear the phrases.
Hungry? Thank you.
Sorry, can I just, I rarely hear the phrases common sense and compliance officer in the same sentence.
At least it was not in the creativity room.
So I'm going to break the silence. Hi, it's Kay here from
Thank you,
GSK.
Kay.
I have a question about the point you made about reimbursement. I'd just like to know how that's been managed for patients. At GSK, we don't actually ask patients to book travel and accommodation up front. We do that for them and prepay. So I'd just like to understand if you've covered that within your work.
Yes, we actually make the recommendation in our work that it be prepaid so that someone's not out of pocket for those things, but that if it can't be prepaid, that people are reimbursed within 30 days.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good, thank you very much. Ingrid, the floor is yours.
Yeah, our group was working on tools that have to be developed based on the gap analysis that was presented yesterday in Work Package 2 in this breakout session. And we structured the session in such a way that we first briefly presented what is already underway, because Work Package 4 had already started in spring to work on obvious gaps that we had already identified within our community. And these were the code of conduct, how does a CAP work, community advisory board, the disclosure of interest, and also we had identified that the UPATI guideline for interaction between patients and R&D was a very high-level guideline that needed now more details. And so we have already created those 4 subgroups or task forces to work on those documents, and that was presented first. And the second part was then the conclusions from yesterday's gap analysis and the work that had been done in that breakout group. And that led to the conclusion that, in fact, 3 areas really need further work. And that is, on one hand, the definition of the criteria and the process to find patients and involving patients into the process. The second question was around the reporting. So far, there was obviously a big gap in reporting the results and the fact that there was a patient engagement initiative and activity. So how should the reporting work, and also the disseminating of that information? The third question was then how to create a long-standing relationship between the respective stakeholder and patients. And a fourth gap that was identified, not officially through the process directly yesterday in the breakout session, but that was underlying through different activities that have taken place so far, was how to get everybody starting to work on this initiative. So how can we make people, organizations start with the interaction? So what we did was we created 4 groups who were then asked to think about what should be key elements in the respective topic, document, whatever that is going to be, also including the question how to ensure inclusiveness, because we had discussed that yesterday, that it's so important to achieve inclusiveness, and also what should be done to make sure that this document or this tool is going to be attractive and really meeting the needs. And we have decided then to do this feedback a little bit different. So I'm just making here the introduction, and we have agreed that the respective groups are going to present that themselves, because they had so many, so important results that it would be impossible for me to represent that properly. And secondly, I think the enthusiasm and the energy at these tables deserves that they present themselves to you. So, Kay, would you be so kind to start just out of your memory, key points, 2 minutes, just the highlights.
And you got 4 groups.
We have 4. But mine is half.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll only take 2 minutes. Don't worry, Ingrid. So our breakout group, were tasked to talk about the criteria and processes for identifying patient representatives to be involved in patient engagement activities. And the clear recommendation that we wanted to make was that we have what we call a matchmaker platform, so that patients can opt in and sign up and volunteer to be involved in various activities, whether it's an ad board, whether it's a focus group, whatever it is, plain language summaries, whatever we've been talking about over the course of the last 2 days. And then the criteria around it, how you might sign up, what you would be asked to provide. We talked about whether people might want to submit their CV, but that would be optional. Things around privacy, how you might, who would access that platform, who would host it, who would pay for it. All of that is something that we want to really tease out. And I think this is something we've been discussing in UPATI for a number of years, but didn't really have the scope to be able to deliver it in that project. We have discussed it in Paradigm, but I would like the teams in Paradigm to consider this as a recommendation from that working group. I mean, I could go on about the details that we discussed, but really that's the next step for us in Work Package 4 to take what our group told us and do something with that.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Kay. Group number 2 on reporting. Yeah. Thank you.
So we were looking at tools to help fill a gap around reporting and dissemination. So we felt there was a need for some framework around making sure that there was a really clear, well-developed early communication plan. So following a typical kind of who are you trying to communicate it to, identifying the target audience. What is it you're trying to communicate and how are you going to do that? So we talked about, with regard to the what, we talked about how there was 2 different kinds of communication that we may want to disseminate when it came to patient engagement. So one element being sort of pharma-driven initiatives like advisory boards that had involved patients, and how important it was to make sure that any communication from an advisory board at least went back to the participants to make sure that they understood the impact and the results of the discussions they'd had. And beyond that, making sure that communication happened within that company, because quite often there were some examples of where an advisory board might happen in one part of the company, and then really we're not learning enough from those initiatives and building on them in other parts of the company. So that level of internal communication, but then also understanding what it is, where possible, that we can communicate externally. And then the other element that we talked about was communicating patient engagement that involved patients and really encouraging patients to publish alongside other authors. So really coming up with tools that would help patients to co-author medical publications that they had been involved in. And we talked about the importance of building on some of the existing criteria. So we mentioned the GRIP2 guidelines, but also, making lay summaries of good publication practice and really empowering patients to understand what it means to be an author, and also educating co-authors who maybe aren't patients as to what the importance of that patient role is in that authorship, and how they do fulfill the authorship criteria and can really add value to that communication. And then we also touched on how best to disseminate them. And we talked about the value of the robust data in the medical literature and the importance of plain language summaries, and more guidance around good lay language and building on some of the great work that's already out there, but also making sure of obvious things like open access. And there was some discussions around whether there needs to be more journals that encourage the publication of patient engagement activities, because there was some discussion around sometimes this isn't that easy to publish, but we really need to create a really solid body of evidence that we can build on moving forward. And we also talked about the need to not just publish the impact, although that's obviously really important, but also to look at publishing and communicating protocols so that we can improve not only the outcomes of the research, but also improve how we do it as well. I think that was everything.
Thank you very much. So you understand I would have never been able to summarize all that conversation at this very dynamic table in this way. The next topic was about creating long-standing relationships. And in that group, we discussed for quite some time how to approach that. And it turned out that we have really to distinguish here between the different phases of the medicine's development process and the life cycle. It is different whether you have, or let's say the situation is different whether you are in the very early phase where you discuss where patients are engaged in discussing the development of a suitable treatment for a particular disease and what would be the best approaches, versus having a drug that is under development and participating in the development of the different trials. And it's different again when we talk about the post-marketing phase, when the drug is already on the market and it's more about reimbursement, safety, etc. So when we are going to work on this document, then we will have to make that distinction. The underlying principles were that, of course, all the topics that are worked out by the other groups, like disclosure of interest, fair market value, contracts, etc., all that must be given. That is very clear. And it's also, therefore, very important to have, from the beginning, a plan that describes the objectives of the collaboration, the expected outcomes, the processes, but also the risks, and also the dissemination, the reporting and the dissemination, so that it's very well thought through what is expected, what should be done, and then also have a possibility to follow on and through that to see whether we are still on track with our plans. One very key credo that came on and on and on was, however we do it and in whatever phase of the development we are, the independence of the patients and patient organization needs to be maintained and guarded, or ensured and guarded. So whatever the concept is that we are approaching in that collaboration, this independence needs to be ensured, and there are different ways of doing that and different options that have to be decided then in the different contexts. Are there any questions on that? Yes, please.
I've been hearing a lot about lay summary. Could you just please wait, because the session is live streamed, so. Thank you.
I've heard at several points the mentioning of lay summaries. Mm-hmm. We know that the clinical trials regulation puts an obligation to create lay summaries. The regulation has been postponed for a number of times now, and it should be in by the end of this year, hopefully. Does anyone know if this is actually going to happen, yes or no? And if it's not going to happen, what measures are being put into place so we do not keep on extending and that to find a way that companies start producing lay summaries even before regulation actually comes in?
Okay, I can give you a very exact answer here, because that is one of my many activities here. That will not happen this year. The clinical trial regulation will, if everything goes well, come into force end of next year, beginning of 2021. But the likelihood that this happens increases. The underlying problem is that there needs to be a functioning, very big database, a single portal and underlying database for all those trials, and this needs to be available in 27 languages, etc. So it's really complex, and this got delayed and delayed, but now they are in the very final phase of testing, then there needs to be an audit, and then it can start. So probably in 15, 16 months from now, we can really start. Now, the lay summaries are already initiated by quite a number of companies. The bigger companies are doing that already on a voluntary basis. But there is an initiative ongoing called Roadmap Initiative for Good Lay Summary Practices that is working on how to organize the development of lay summaries and the inclusion of patients into the various process steps, and also about the dissemination of lay summaries. So we are working very intensively on that.
Thank you. An additional question to it. I remember attending a conference on clinical trials regulation, and I remember it was like 3 or 4 years ago, and I remember at that point we were already seeing the gaps which were in the regulation. So this was 3 or 4 years ago. By now I'm sure there are even more gaps identified because of the length of time it has taken for the regulation to get where it is today. So is there anything being done on an EU level to bridge those gaps which were identified in that conference and in subsequent meetings which followed?
I'm afraid we have to take that into the coffee or into the lunch break, because this is really a long topic and I don't want to use the time here. But I think it's really important that we continue now with the last group, the 4th group, and this is the one on the starter kit. If you would be so kind, Giorgio.
Yes, so we had a group dedicated on how to start, initiate this partnership. And then we were looking at the possibility to develop a starter kit, so a concrete tool where we could integrate all the different kind of patient engagement activities, and also look at different levels of interactions, not only focus on patient representative and industry, but also expanding to other stakeholders. And one of the ideas was really to have kind of hands-on kind of toolbox, a small number of tools that will guide this process. So for instance, giving a checklist to whoever was interested to start these engagement activities, to know whether in each phase of the medicine development process, what are the steps that needs to be taken to start the communication with the patients, but also to what are the expectations, what are the legal requirements which are in place in order to start this kind of interaction, and not only on different levels, for instance, looking at advisory boards, but also at individual engagement with individual patients. And it came out very strongly that we have to focus on the inclusiveness of this tool, because we had within the group a number of representatives also from group of minorities, community with specific needs, and then we were also thinking how to make this material more usable for this kind of, for instance, for the ultra rare disease. And then we thought that maybe the material should be also accompanied with some case studies specifically developed from the perspective of the different stakeholders. So for instance, if the company X wants to start getting in touch with a specific group which is particularly challenging in terms of having informations transferred on how to work in reporting on clinical trials, what kind of steps need to be done. We thought that one good starting point is the material, the starter kits that are already there from the UPATI experience, but we think that based on that experience, we can move on and start to develop also material, including the perspective of industries, of regulators, and from other stakeholders. So that's what we came out from the 45 minutes discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's a good overview of the very different type of topics that we will have to cover in the next 11 months, and we will need to find a very efficient way of integrating all the different ideas, suggestions, and different situations that we need to think about, because what we will have to achieve is something that is general enough to fit for everybody, but specific enough to make sense for everybody. And I think that will be the delicate task that we will have to find, and hopefully that will work. And all ideas from your side and support and creativity is more than welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was about to say, before the well-deserved round of applause, I have a few things to say, but that's okay. Just to give you a bit about the numbers, we are, give or take, 250-ish people in the room either today or yesterday, so I think this is quite nice. We got yesterday 25 people with the online session going beyond the easy targets when it comes to patient engagement. And the live stream, believe it or not, I'm not believing it, but it's been seen by about 400 people this morning. So that's actually pretty cool. I have to say that because we're working, the funding is coming from the IMI, everybody in the room will have again to register, please, if you didn't, at the desk in the entrance. This is just it's boring, but it's very important for us, so just give your consent to be taken in picture, hopefully. You may also not give your consent, that's also fine, but we also need you to sign the participant list. The tweet, actually I'm not winning, because I knew by saying that could have been a conflict of interest here, I would get great suggestions. So Anna, you won yesterday, okay? And then you have the right to say who won today. So as I have the microphone, I can say it if you want. So she wants to nominate Angela Bradshaw for a last email or last tweet on the session that Paul described this morning about moving dots and what are the most important metrics in the world for patient engagement. So Angela, you won today. I accept my defeat. The session resumes at 2 p.m. in this room, and all the slides and recording of the live streaming should be, I hope, guys, a request will come to you, to make them available. So then you will have all the slides with the reports and with the recording if you want to share them further. And now, lunch, everybody.